Eucatastrophe by A Real Sword. Chapter 8. Patton. Home, sweet home. Octavian of Cadath lets out a little sigh of contentment as he sets the horses to graze at the edge of the forest, tying them off on some thinner trees. Do you know, I actually forget how much I miss this place. Patton squints into the darkness of the tall, thin trees and tries to see what Octavian does, but no. It just looks really spooky and like there could be creepy things hiding in the shadows, and he has the feeling if he tried using a flashlight, the battery would immediately break rather than actually provide any light. It's like Virgil's room, but big and leafy, and also not a room, and probably even more actively trying to kill him. Sorry, interjects Janice, who's frowning and adjusting his scarf. He'd changed out of his pretty silky gown for practicality's sake halfway through the ride over, and is now back in that turtleneck of his. You live here? Used to, Octavian corrects cheerfully. He hooks his guitar thing over one shoulder and scoops a handful of coins from one of the horse's saddle packs, tucking it into a pocket. Although, if you're born in this place, you never truly leave. He drops his feathered cap onto his head and adjusts it so it sits at an appropriately jaunty angle before gesturing expansively into the darkness. Welcome, esteemed friends and companions, to the Cadath Woods. Oh, Logan says, and adjusts his glasses in that way that he does when his mind's adjusting to something also. I had been assuming Cadath was the town. It's the forest, says Octavian, and the mountain, technically. They both fall under the Fey domain. But no, the town is called Dub Avon. These are neat names, but they don't really mean much to Patton. He tries to remember them later, in case there's a test or something. Octavian takes 3 coins, pinches them in a neat stack between 2 fingers, and tosses them upwards, sending them spinning and glinting in the darkness. They land in a cluster of 3 on the ground, and the arrow stamped on the centermost one is pointing off at an angle. Off we go then, he says, scooping up the coins. And with that, they set off into the forest in the direction that his coin had indicated. It's really dark out, but they can sort of see where they're going. Well, they can see where Octavian is, and he's leading them and also seems to know what he's doing. He's also a lot less talkative for some reason. He's got a weirdly serious, but also really determined look on his handsome face. Also, Patton can hear things in the forest around them. It's hard to make out what they are exactly, but there's a lot of distant howls and growls and some heavy breathing that's a bit too close for comfort. A lot too close for comfort, really, although nothing actually does show up. He wonders why that is, and if Octavian has anything to do with it. It's hard to tell. So, says Janice, once they've been going a while like this, as long as we're out here, walking along with nothing to do, Thomas, you seem coherent and cognizant enough. Let's talk about the sequence of events that led up to us being here. Thomas winces a bit. Okay, he agrees, with only a bit of reluctance. Yeah, so, first of all, Virgil? Mm-hmm. You were right about the whole making the pie thing. I really shouldn't have done that. Yeah, Virgil says, extremely pointedly. I think we are far, far past that, Janice replies dryly. You ate the pie, and then went to bed, and that's where our memories seem to diverge. What do you remember from after that? Not much, Thomas admits with a frown. I remember hearing the Earl King's voice, and then I was in the kitchen making some kind of mixture? He hesitates for a second, his foot hovering above the ground, before he shakes his head and keeps on walking. No idea what that was about. Yes, Janice frowns. I was meaning to ask about the shoe polish. That's been haunting me for the last few days, as a matter of fact. Please tell me you didn't drink any of that. Drink the pharmacon? Thomas asks, like he's commenting on the weather. I don't think I did. It wasn't meant for me. He blinks, shakes his head again. Oh, that's weird. That was like I wasn't even me for a second there. Did I just say pharmacon? What does that even mean? You did. Virgil's eyes are narrowed. Thomas, this might be a stupid question, but do you think you might be possessed? Would I know if I was? Thomas asks, now looking a bit panicked. It's kind of just like normal, with Virgil making Thomas all anxious about things that might not even matter. Except it's nothing like normal, because Virgil's only doing it through saying stuff, not feeling stuff, and this might matter. A lot, actually. Can we focus for a moment? Logan says. The answer to this is no, obviously, but it's really nice that he's still trying. Thomas, is there anything else you remember? A forest, says Thomas. This one, maybe? And then a boat, and someone took me up the mountain on his horse, and he made fun of me because I'd never ridden a horse before. Really? Says Roman. I could have sworn we had at some point. Yeah, when I was 12, Thomas says. But, he said a few things about mirrors and people, which may have to do with the whole alternate universe people thing, and then I ended up in the castle, and the Earl King... He shudders slightly, as if the memory is making him faintly nauseous. He said he accepted the trade, whatever that means, and he took my body. I stayed there for about a week. I see. Some kind of time dilation effect with this world, Logan mutters to himself, like he's taking audible notes. And then, louder, and then? Well, then I escaped, said Thomas, with the tone of someone stating the blatantly obvious. You escaped? Roman prompts, after a second where Thomas just doesn't expand on this. And I went home and fainted from exhaustion on the front step, Thomas adds. I think. That seems like the sort of thing I'd do. He glances all around at all of them. And then it's kind of nothing until the town, although that's, blurry. The first really clear thing I remember is waking up in the bedroom with Pat and Verge. That's about it. But you escaped all on your own, Logan clarifies after another moment of silence. His tone is tinged with faint disbelief, which is kind of unfair because Thomas can do a lot of things if he just puts his mind to it, including escaping from a fairy castle and a terrifying magic king guy, and running down a mountain and crossing an entire dimension to make it all the way back to his house in complete darkness. Actually, no. Patton's suspension of disbelief has a limit, as it turns out. What Thomas is saying is wild. No, I had help, Thomas says, very slowly. He bites his lip. Okay, why is it so hard to think about this? It's like I'm trying to read a book, but the handwriting is terrible, and also it's written in freaking Esperanto or something, and also someone keeps pulling it away from me every time I see a word I recognize. That's what we're hoping to remedy, Octavian points out, as they pause again for him to throw the 3 coins into the air and search for the one that lands in the middle. This time it seems to be pointing in a wildly different direction to where they had been initially heading. Octavian frowns to himself and mutters something darkly under his breath as he scoops up the coins, before adding, If he'd just stop moving around. Logan looks kind of mildly furious at the fact that they're just sort of following coins around in an empty forest in the early hours of the morning, which is probably the furthest thing from scientific that it's possible to be. Patton thinks that this world is more Roman's sort of place than his. They should just do whatever Roman's doing, which happens to be following Octavian. So following Octavian it is. Says Roman as they progress deeper into the forest. How about this? Channel Logan. I'm right here, says Logan. You don't need to channel me. I can provide my own input easily enough. Not what I meant. Thomas, just state things that you know to be completely, perfectly true in every way. Maybe we can figure out some stuff based on it. The words you're looking for are empirical and extrapolate, Logan provides, pinching the bridge of his nose between 2 fingers. Not that you care. He's kind of right, because probably none of them actually do care, but Patton doesn't tell him that. It'd just make him feel bad, and now's really not the time to make Logan feel bad, not with all the stress that he, and all of them, are under right now. Okay, just the facts. Fact number 1. Someone helped me escape from the Earl King's castle the first time I was there, Thomas says, scratching his neck absently. Fact 2. It wasn't the same person that brought me there. They were shorter, for one thing. Okay, there, you see? Roman points at Thomas. Now we're getting somewhere. Are we, though? Virgil says. We are. Octavian sounds distracted, yet strangely reassuring. He tosses a single coin up into the air, squinting as it seems to hang for a split second longer than it should. I assure you our destination is well within reach. Not what I meant, but I appreciate the update, Virgil says. Keep up the navigation thing, Bard guy. You're doing great. Probably? I agree with Virgil. Logan is frowning down at his midnight blue, ankle-length dress that he hasn't had an opportunity to change out of yet. Actually, most of them haven't had a chance, or just haven't bothered to change out of their fairy banquet clothes. Patton actually really likes the soft fabric of the pants and dress shirt he'd managed to find for himself. Although he had reclaimed his usual hoodie from Janice at the earlier opportunity, he just feels naked without it for some reason. Hang on, what's Logan agreeing about anyway? I fail to see how knowing the approximate height of your mysterious rescuer benefits us in any way, he's saying. It probably doesn't, but it's better than nothing, Thomas points out. Right? It's not like I can remember anything else. Are you sure? Probes Janice, looking like he very much wishes he could be dialed directly into the things Thomas is forgetting and denying to himself corner of Thomas's brain right now, as opposed to being cut off and physically present in every possible way. No details, no vague recollections, nothing? Thomas has nothing more to add, other than a look of intense concentration and exasperation and a frustrated shake of the head. Roman lets out an equally frustrated huff of a sigh and pulls a face in Octavian's direction. Hopefully this friend of yours will be able to shed some light on the situation. That's the hope, Octavian replies, and pauses as he draws out another 3 coins from his side pouch. He jingles them around absently in his cupped hands for a second, looking distracted. What's up with the coins, anyway? Remus asks, ducking down to snatch one from Octavian's pouch. Octavian, who apparently has the patience of a saint or an angel or something, is unconcerned by having Remus's fingers near his waist, and even tosses him another one. It's a charm, he says, losing the distracted look. An extremely basic one, but those tend to be the most effective in my experience. You use it to find things you've lost. And what are you looking for? Remus tilts his head at him curiously. Your sanity? Because, holy shit, we've been wandering around here for literally forever now, freezing our tits off, and I swear, fuck, shit, goddamn, ass, cock, etc. All these trees look exactly the same. I apologize for my intrusive thoughts, Thomas tells Octavian, a bit weakly. Usually nobody can hear them. Believe me, I've heard worse, Octavian says, with a little quirk of his lips, although he seems pretty on edge and a lot gloomier than he had been when they'd been going up the mountain. Compared to some of the crowds I performed for, Remus comes off as positively Benedictine. Ouch! Remus pantomimes being shot in the chest, staggering against a tree with a dramatic little swoon. I have absolutely no idea what that means, but goddamn does it hurt! Thomas, please prepare for me upping my game by like 1,000,000%. Ah, remarks Octavian, sounding a touch regretful. I appear to have encouraged him. He glances over at Thomas. I do hope that's not... Don't worry about it, says Roman, sighing. He's pretty much always like this. You probably couldn't make him worse if you tried. Don't let that stop you, Remus exclaims, pushing himself blithely away from the tree and jogging a few steps to keep pace with the rest of them. Making me worse is actually highly encouraged. I will keep that in mind. Octavian tosses the 3 coins into the air again, but this time only 2 of them go clattering to the ground. For some reason, the final coin just hangs in the air, spinning slowly in place. Everyone stops, falling silent. Octavian regards the spinning coin with some satisfaction, and then looks up, past it and into the forest. There you are, he says. Here I am, comes the somewhat acidic reply. And out of the darkness comes the rather alarming figure of a man who looks more plant and dirt than flesh and blood, the ragged remains of what once was probably a luxurious velvet green and silver cloak hanging from his shoulders, mud-stained and mold-covered. There are what look like actual animals of some sort nesting in his hair, although it's hard to tell what sort of animals they are exactly. In one sharp, precise moment, his hand shoots out to snatch the spinning coin from the air. Even under all the layers of grime and moss and dirt, it's hard to miss his striking resemblance to Octavian of Kadath. They've got the same dark skin and the same curly hair and the same gleam of intelligence in their eyes. They're even the same height. They could be brothers. You needed me for something? Asks this new person, crossing his arms. Or are you just here to taunt me some more? He's got Octavian's voice, too, except it's lower, hoarser, like he ate a lot of rocks, or maybe screamed for a solid couple of hours without pausing for breath. He also really does not look pleased that they're there, or maybe he's just not pleased with Octavian, since he doesn't know the rest of them. Ah, says Logan, with the air of someone who's just figured something out. I see. And Remus seems to make the same connection. His eyes go wide with excitement, and he grabs Roman's arms, flailing wildly. Hey! He hisses. That's him! That's me! And, oh right, that does kind of make sense, now that Ponton stops to think about it. A lot of sense. Gosh, this whole alternate universe doubles thing is going to take a lot of getting used to. Are you guys twins? Thomas asks slowly, looking between the 2 of them. At this, the other man lets out an angry, feral-sounding snort of something almost but not entirely unlike amusement. Octavian makes it's a bit complicated face, and an appropriate noise and hand-wiggly gesture to go along with it. "No," snaps the mossy forest man. "No, we are not twins. He is not my brother, and he never will be, and we are not related." "Right," says Virgil, somewhat dubiously. "So the fact that you look completely identical, apart from all the mud and dirt and grime, is, a fun little coincidence?" Octavian hesitates visibly for a second, and then brushes his curly wild hair away from his face, and more specifically, away from where it's been hanging over his ears, because, as it turns out, his ears are longer than you'd expect, and they taper off to delicate points. "Oh, you're a fairy!" Patton blurts, startled. "More than that," Roman says, taking a step back, understanding blooming across his face. "You're a changeling, aren't you? Meaning that you're—" "Absolutely correct," says the man in the ragged cape, with such audible bitterness it almost hurts to hear. "My name was Octavian of Dub Avon, and this is the thing that stole my life nearly 30 years ago." Octavian's voice is soft and pleading. "I've told you, you can come back whenever you want. I'm more than happy to show you around, reintroduce you to the human world." "And yet," the other Octavian retorts, "you continue to use my name, and sing and dance your merry way across Dub Avon like you own the damn place. What would they say if I showed your face in town, looking like this?" "I'll take you to the river, wash the forest away from you," begs Octavian, the original Octavian. Or maybe not? The one they'd met first, anyway. Fairy Octavian. Octavian. He sounds like he's had this argument a million times, and is only just going through the motions at this point out of habit. There's a thin, lost-sounding thread of heartbreak in his voice. "I'll get you human clothes, the best I can buy. I'll show you how to shoe a horse like humans do, how to dance without drawing your friends into a trance, how to laugh and sing to the beat of Heli's music. Just come with me, please." "You're too much of a human now for the Earl King to want you, and I'm not human enough for the town to want me," the Forest Octavian snaps. "Your continuous pretense that things can be any different, it makes me want to choke you, to snap your neck, to bury you in iron and leave you to burn in the ground, to feed your writhing body to whatever thing the court is trying to push back into the darkness, so nobody ever has to think about you ever again." "Do you really want me gone that badly?" the Fairy Octavian says, sounding a bit stricken. The Forest Octavian stares balefully at his changeling counterpart for a long, long time. "What do you want? You wouldn't come here if there wasn't something else you wanted to take from me, so please, just get on with it." "Don't you care who we are?" Roman asks, sounding a bit affronted. "Not in the least," he replies, not even looking over at Roman. Remus looks a bit less delighted than before, but only a bit. His expression has shifted from outright horniness to thoughtful horniness, which is only a slight improvement. "We need to speak to the Fisher King," says Fairy Octavian, "and you know how he is to find." Forest Octavian laughs wildly and flings his arm out, looking annoyed and frustrated. "That's it? That's what you needed from me?" He curses loudly in a melodic, high-pitched language for a full 15 seconds, and then points firmly and confidently in a seemingly random direction. "He's waiting at the river. Obviously. Now get out of my sight. You make me sick." The first Octavian nods, and then takes a step backwards, and then hesitates. "I really am sorry," he says lowly. "But I didn't ask to be made, and I didn't ask to be swapped out for you." Forest Octavian doesn't seem to consider this a reasonable sort of argument. He just glares and points into the darkness once more, before whirling away in a flurry of rags and moss and spite, and stalking away in the opposite direction. It's pretty clear he wants nothing to do with them, which is a shame, because he also looks in pretty dire need of a hug. The only Octavian left, and this is a good turn of events, because things had been starting to get confusing with two of them, lets out the longest and most exhausted sigh imaginable, and leans against a nearby tree. He adjusts his hair with one hand, tucking his pointed ears back within the mess of curls so they're no longer visible, and then just breathes for a while. He also looks like he needs a hug. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he tells them after a moment, voice uncomfortably dull. "Don't worry about it," Patton reassures, patting at his arm. "We all have bad days. One time I got real angry about community service in video games, and I turned into a giant frog monster. And let me tell you, that's the sort of thing I'd rather forget about. You're fine, kiddo. There's a dangerous moment there where Patton's afraid that he went and stepped in it and said the wrong thing. But then Octavian smiles, very slowly. I don't understand a single word you just said, he says, but I think I understand and appreciate the sentiment. Thank you, Patton. Any time, replies Patton. So let's go and track down this fish king of yours so he can school us on whatever we need to know. A pause. School? Because, fish? He's playing up the goofiness a bit. But sometimes the goofs need to be exaggerated. It makes things feel normal, or less bad. And even if Octavian doesn't know them very well, he does seem to appreciate a good pun, judging by his small snort of amusement. Now that was truly dreadful. All the best jokes are, he says, and offers Octavian a hand. Octavian takes it and allows himself to be tugged over to the rest of them. Which way was that river again? Octavian points in the appropriate direction and, still allowing his hand to be held, which is really sweet actually, starts leading them off to it. Almost immediately the familiar sound of rushing water can be heard. It's far off, but they're definitely headed in the right direction. So that was your... Roman pauses, clearly unsure of what to say. Counterpart? Which is weird because you're kind of my counterpart, so it's like a whole reflection of a reflection thing. There's a lot going on here. I suppose so, Octavian sighs. As you say, it's complicated. He drops Patton's hand with a slightly apologetic look and reaches for his guitar thing, swinging it around so it's in his hands rather than across his back. Oh, another song! Good. Patton had missed the last one, and Roman hadn't seemed all that enthusiastic about reenacting it. Octavian strums a slow, simple chord and opens his mouth like he's about to start singing, and then he shuts it, looking frustrated. No. He grimaces and shakes his head. No, it's not done yet. Writer's block? Asks Thomas sympathetically. I feel that. Probably not as much as I do, Roman mutters. Something like that. Octavian stows his guitar thing back to its position on his back. I've been working on it for, quite a while now. It's a story I need to tell. Perhaps it's a bit tragic for anyone to ever pay me to sing, but not everything's meant to be shared. Patton doesn't know quite how to respond to this. He could say some sort of vague platitude like, "You'll get there eventually," and actually that's what's on the tip of his tongue, but Octavian looks so sad and frustrated that he bites it back. Instead, he just bumps his arm with Octavian and smiles at him, lips pressed together in sympathy, wishing he could do something to help this strange, musical ferryman. For the record, says Remus thoughtfully, I think I would fuck him. Octavian's face goes instantly blank. Remus, snaps Thomas. The other Octavian, Remus clarifies, the hotter one. No offense, Octavian. Yes, Remus, says Virgil, we all know your answer to the BuzzFeed "Can we ask you a really weird question" quiz, and none of us want to hear your reasoning behind it, ever again. Just saying. Remus shrugs like he doesn't have a problem in the world. The ragged, trampy, forest chic look is great on me. Alt me. He's on to something there, I'm telling you. Thankfully, he does end that particular train of thought there, because Octavian's expression is growing slowly less and less amused with each passing second. It's a while before they reach the point where the sound of the river rushing along merrily is as loud as it can possibly be. When they do, Octavian stops them all with a raised arm before they can push through the final barrier of shrubbery and tree branches. Before I do, there's something I should mention, he tells them. Don't bring up his leg. His leg, Logan says, eyes narrowing slightly in that I'm remembering something important way he sometimes does. There was an incident some 100 years ago, explains Octavian. It's a bit of a sore spot for him. Literally, that is. His banishment from the court was considerably more violent than mine, and, well, there's a reason he spends most of his time fishing these days. Don't mention the leg. Got it, Virgil says with a faint sigh. Why not? It's not like this day can get any weirder or more specific. Anything else? Roman asks. And then when Octavian shakes his head, well, what are we waiting for then? Quite, agrees Octavian. He holds a cluster of branches to one side and they all file through. And there it is, that same river. impossibly deep and wider than Patton remembers, and with an inky sort of darkness lurking in its depths. And the Fisher King sits in a small boat moored at the edge of it. Patton recognizes the boat instantly, because it's probably the most generic boat imaginable. It's the same boat they arrived at the river in. It's anyone's guess as to how it ended up here, because last they'd seen of it, it had been floating away down the river, and this is basically the opposite direction. It's also anyone's guess how the Fisher King managed to get into the boat, because honestly the stab wound on his leg looks really nasty. He shouldn't be standing, let alone climbing around into strange, rickety, magical boats. Although he doesn't look all that concerned about it, or in pain. He's humming to himself gently, and fiddling with the string of his long wooden fishing rod, completely unconcerned. He's got the pointed ears and otherworldly shine that all of the human-looking fairies they've met so far have had, but also, he looks kind of old. Not old, but aged. His hair is white, and he has the beginnings of a scruffy, badly kept beard, and his clothes, although fancy and decorated with all sorts of watery patterns and colors, look semi-ancient and almost dated, like they come from an earlier sort of medieval than the one they're in right now. Patton feels bad about disturbing someone who seems to be so genuinely peaceful and content, but Octavian seems to have no such qualms. He lets out a shout of greeting and starts jogging toward the riverbank, cape fluttering lightly behind him. "Octavian!" exclaims the Fisher King, eyes lighting up as he turns slowly in their direction. His voice is slightly hoarse, like he hasn't spoken to anyone in days, but the joy is unmistakable. "Look at you, my boy! You've grown so much!" Octavian splashes into the river, careless of the mud and his clothes, clambering into the boat with a wide grin stretching across his face. He reaches out to clasp the Fisher King's aged hands tightly in his own. It's really astoundingly adorable. The 7 of them, by a mutual sort of silent agreement, decide to hang back until the 2 of them have an acceptable amount of reunion time. Well, Remus isn't part of this agreement, but Virgil grabs his arm and forcibly holds him back. "Do you think that he might be another one of these mirror people?" Patton wonders quietly, trying to prevent himself from bouncing and squealing. He settles for rocking enthusiastically back and forth on the balls of his feet. "I mean, everyone else we've met has been. But I don't think he's you, Virgil. Not enough eyeshadow. And he doesn't give off Janice vibes either." He squints. "Maybe Leo?" Everyone turns to look at him in flat, blank disbelief, even Remus. Patton thinks that's a little unfair because he genuinely doesn't know. It's not like the name is much to work off, and he looks so old that it's hard to make out any details like the eyes or hair or anything. "Pat," says Virgil, "the Fisher King couldn't more obviously be you." "What?" "Fishing is like the most dad thing to do," Thomas says, "and apparently that's all this guy does, every day, all day." "And he's squishing Octavian's cheeks right now," Roman says. "Total dad." Patton looks over and, okay, that is happening. They may have a point. Just a bit of one. They give them a couple more seconds of reunion and catching up, and then Logan, apparently rapidly losing patience, clears his throat pointedly. "Ah!" Octavian seems to remember their existence and gestures towards them. "I've made some new acquaintances. They happen to be the reason I'm visiting, as a matter of fact. Not that it isn't excellent to see you," he adds. "There's always just so much going on." "Mortals?" asks the Fisher King with an unreadable expression, tilting head oh so slowly to one side. Octavian looks unsure for a moment, and then nods. "I believe so." Logan steps forward to address the Fisher King from as close as he can get without actually getting into the water. "Thomas is having some heart problems." "Octavian said you might be able to help," Roman adds eagerly, bounding up to stand next to him. "Can you do anything for us?" The Fisher King hums thoughtfully to himself, gaze traveling slowly over each of them in turn. He doesn't comment on their near-identical appearances, which is polite of him. "Well," he says eventually, "I don't know about help, but I'll see what I can do. Thomas, was it? Come here, my boy. Let's get a good look at you." Thomas exchanges a glance of trepidation with Virgil, but Octavian gives him an encouraging smile and nod as he swings his legs over the side of the boat and splashes his way back to shore to join the rest of them. Roman pats Thomas on the shoulder, and Remus punches him in the arm in a way that might leave bruising. Thomas winces, rubbing his shoulder, but says, "Sure, just a sec then," and toes his sneakers and socks off before rolling up his sweatpants and stepping out into the river. He clambers carefully into the boat and then sits down opposite the Fisher King, gripping both sides as it rocks and settles. Patton watches somewhat nervously as the Fisher King gives him a kind smile and then places his hand gently on his chest. He's pretty sure that no version of him anywhere would hurt Thomas. On purpose, that is, because he knows he isn't perfect. But also, Logan's other self had done a lot of really bad stuff to Thomas, and they'd had to lie to get him out of there, and, well, Patton's a little worried. Just a smidge. He's ready to jump in there at the slightest sign of danger, probably. But he doesn't need to, apparently, because all that happens is Thomas's eyelids flicker shut briefly, and he lets out a soft noise of slight discomfort before the Fisher King sighs lightly and they both straighten up. The Fisher King is frowning. The good news is that this isn't a fatal sort of affliction. Oh, neat, says Thomas, and waves over at everyone standing on the riverbank. Hey, guys, looks like I'm not dying. Woo! Patton cheers, thumbs-upping as hard as he possibly can. Okay, the bar has to be higher than that, Virgil mutters. However, I'm afraid I cannot do anything for you, the Fisher King continues, which puts a very fast damper on the sudden good mood. This is remarkably outside of my area of expertise, for one thing. And for another, what has been done to you, he taps one long, wrinkled finger twice over Thomas's heart, was done by someone whose magic opposes mine in just about every way possible. Oh. Thomas sounds just about as bewildered as Patton feels. All right, then. Is there something I can do, then? Yes, says the Fisher King. Go speak to him. He gazes out across the river, which is wide and deep and much more turbulent than it had been when they'd first arrived. The two-faced king resides on the far side of these waters. The specifics evade me. He should be happy enough to speak with you, at the very least. But can he put me back to normal? Asks Thomas. I don't think I like feeling like this. It's, he shudders slightly, way too calm in my head. And the shape of everything isn't right. It's like there's someone missing. 6 someones, he adds, glancing over at everyone on the riverbank. I'm sure he can set things to rights, the Fisher King says. The only real question is, does he want to? Wait, does he? Virgil asks. Probably not, Octavian mutters darkly. Ah, says Logan, an irritated little adjustment of his glasses. Another side quest. Fabulous. Hey, side quest, Patton grins. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Roman says brightly. It's off to find the two-faced king for us, then. There's a brief, confusing scuffle between everyone as Thomas gets off the boat and everyone tries to work out where to go and what to do. Octavian says he's going to stay behind and catch up with the Fisher King some more, since apparently he doesn't get on with the Two-Faced King too well either. Something about not picking sides and some sort of sacrifice that Patton doesn't quite get the full gist of. So they all exchange goodbyes with Octavian and the Fisher King, since they might not end up seeing either of them again if everything goes to plan. Patton hugs Octavian. He seems to be surprised that he's on the receiving end of a Patton hug, but hugs back pretty enthusiastically. He smells like wet soil and horse, and is surprisingly bony, but he's pretty good at the whole hugging thing. Is there a bridge or any other means of crossing anywhere nearby? Janice asks. Most people simply walk across, the Fisher King replies. There hasn't been a death in this river for years now. You'll most likely be fine. Walk across the river? Virgil looks over at the water and visibly shudders. Would it be possible to borrow your boat? Logan requests, pragmatic as ever. I believe we did so earlier. It will only be for a few minutes, and if past behavior is anything to extrapolate from, you'll be able to retrieve it quite promptly. The Fisher King chuckles softly and starts rebaiting the end of his line, the rod resting carefully across his lap. It really isn't as deep as you seem to think it is. Janice lets out a noise that means, I'm not convinced and none of you should be either, but Remus is already running in. He splashes into the water, past the Fisher King's boat, and towards the middle of the river, and he's only waist deep. I'm freezing my balls off, he announces loudly, which means that everything's probably fine, although Patton does hear Virgil mutter something low and worried about bull sharks. Sufficiently reassured by this, he starts taking off his shoes and socks. Remus is already on the other side of the river, which is really kind of weird because Patton could have sworn it was wider than that. Cautiously, everyone wades across, and within the blink of an eye they're on the other side, shaking off water and wringing out their soaked pants. The Fisher King and Octavian wave them goodbye from the opposite bank, and Octavian points exaggeratedly in the direction they need to go towards. "Thank you!" Patton yells, hoping he can be heard over the sound of rushing water. "For everything! You guys rock!" The others also wave goodbye, and then they're off, heading along the riverbank in search of yet another strange and ominous king. That makes it, what, the third one so far? There's a lot of kings around these parts. Shouldn't they be rationing out the kings, keeping it on a one king at a time basis, just in case they need one of them for a rainy day? Okay, so, Thomas says, this two-faced king, that's definitely Janice's mirror person, yeah? What a ridiculous suggestion, Janice replies dryly. A king with two faces? That bears no connection to me or my name in the slightest. I really don't know where you get these ideas, Thomas, truly. Just making sure, Thomas says, with an exhausted sort of laugh. His hand creeps up to rest just above his heart, and he continues walking in silence for a few minutes, an expression of faint worry on his face. They're following the curve of the river, which appears to stretch out forever over the horizon. It's either really super late or really super early, depending on what sort of mindset you subscribe to. The sky is a dark, dusky sort of color, and the sounds of birds around them is scattered and sleepy. "What do you want to do when we get back home?" Rowan asked Thomas, thoughtfully after a while of this. Thomas blinks, maybe take a shower? Eat some non-fairy junk food? I'm not sure. Shouldn't you know? Patton shrugs. We're kinda out of sync with you right now, kiddo. For once, we're not thinking precisely what you're thinking. We can only guess, Logan adds. Okay then, let me turn that one back on you, Thomas says. What do you want to do when we get back? He waves vaguely in the direction of all of them. All of you, I mean. Fairy-proof the house, Roman says instantly. Horseshoes over the doors, buy an iron sword or 6. You can never be too careful. That's my line, Virgil complains lightly, and yeah, that. But also sleep for 1,000,000 years. He pauses, seems to realize what he just said, and shudders. Maybe not 1,000,000 years. Maybe we should just stay awake for the rest of our collective life, just to make sure something like this never happens again. I concur with sleep, Janice adds, and sighs. When I told you to take some time off for yourself, that was not a cue for you to get kidnapped so we could all go on some grand magical quest together. Remember that next time, please. I'll try, Thomas says, but, no guarantees. Logan? I'm torn, Logan admits. On the one hand, I would greatly like to delve deeper into the mythological basis of this world we found ourselves in, to see if there's any real historical basis to anything that's happened. On the other, this is, in a word, disturbing. If you need a hand with repressing anything, Janice offers. No, we need to know what we're dealing with in the future. Logan shakes his head. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We need to get out of this first. Patton's next. He took some time to think about this, and he thinks he has a pretty good answer. I think a sleepover with all of your friends, or maybe just a few of them. He shrugs. Playing Truth or Dare and painting your nails and eating pizza while watching Ghibli movies sounds really good right now. Thomas is in his 30s. Is Truth or Dare still an acceptable sleepover party game? Logan asks. Yes, absolutely. How dare you suggest it isn't, goes Roman. God, I miss my friends, Thomas agrees, a bit wistfully. And they're not going to believe that any of this happened, are they? Almost certainly not, Janice says. Joan and Talon must be worried out of their minds by now, Virgil mutters, back hunching in a way that looks both reflexive and incredibly painful. I know there's nothing we can do about it, but I hate making them feel like this. We'll be done with this soon, Patton promises. All we need to do is talk to this other king person, and then we'll be back home and doing all of these things. Except maybe repressing things. That seems unhealthy. Janice mutters something that sounds like, look who's talking, but Patton chooses to ignore it because A, he's right, and B, this is super not the time to get into that. And now all 6 of them have had their respective turns, which means there's only one of them left who hasn't stated their opinion, and, oh no, it's probably going to be something really disgusting, isn't it? Patton kind of wants to cover his ears, but that would probably be rude. Do I have to go home? Remus asks. That brings everyone up short for a few long seconds. Thomas blinks. What do you mean by that? Well, Octavian actually likes my presence, Remus says. Or he's pretending to, at least, which, good enough, right? He shrugs. I don't know. This place is ruled by a vicious, inhuman king who definitely has a flower kink and almost certainly has a control kink. There's horrible things in the forest, a castle full of fairies to seduce and fuck and get enchanted by, and that's not even getting started on everything that's not near the river. You want to stay here? Thomas asks carefully. Not sure yet, Remus says. Probably. Like I said, I like this place. I'll get back to you about that. Everyone exchanges glances. Nobody seems to know what to think about this, so nobody says anything. They keep on walking. Eventually, Thomas strikes up a quiet conversation with Logan about something or other, but Patton isn't paying attention. He can't pay attention. There's just so much to think about. Would Remus leaving be such a bad thing? Patton doesn't think Thomas would mind, but also he doesn't want to make assumptions about what Thomas thinks, because that hasn't been a great thing to do, historically speaking. But Remus is all these gross and icky thoughts, and Patton has a feeling that if he disappeared, then Thomas would feel a lot better on a daily basis. But also, well, Remus is a part of Thomas, and if he goes missing, then some other stuff might go missing too. Like when Virgil had thought that if he left, Thomas would stop being all anxious all the time and be happier, but actually all that happened was Thomas turning into a living disaster creature with no regard for his own life. And then there's the fact that Janice really likes Remus, and would be sad if he was gone, and Patton's not all too sure what's going on with them right now, but he's sure that Roman wouldn't be all that happy if his brother left. And then there's the obvious question, which is, can Remus even do that? It's more than ducking out. It's like walking away, like a divorce, except without marriage being involved in the first place, and instead of taking the dogs and kids in the separation, Remus is taking a hefty segment of Thomas's soul or something. He's about to open his mouth and ask something, maybe try and see what Logan thinks, maybe try to probe at Remus a bit more. But this is the point in which a dark blur crashes into Thomas from out of nowhere, causing him to yell out in alarm. The yell becomes a startled grunt as he is knocked over into some nearby bushes, and Virgil and Janice are immediately on the defensive, Virgil snarling and puffing up angrily, and Janice wielding his canvas bag like he intends to use it as a melee weapon. Roman rushes forward, pushing aside stray foliage with a foot. "Release Thomas, you fiend!" There's a quick, nearly incoherent babble of something in a language that Patton doesn't understand. Guys? I think I'm all right, actually," Thomas says, voice muffled. And when he sits up, everyone can see his unexpected attacker. It's not a monster, or a demon, or even a wild animal. It's a little boy. He's small, maybe 8 or 9 years old at a guess. He's got big dark eyes and messy hair and a bunch of really weird markings running up from underneath the collar of his cloak thing. They look like swirly tattoos, but also he looks way too young to get tattoos, so maybe they're like fantasy temporary tattoos or something? He's currently regarding all of them with quite a lot of suspicion, and clinging to Thomas like letting go would result in a million kittens dying. It's super cute, but also super weird because, like, where did he even come from? "Oh shit, he's another fairy!" Remus exclaims, pointing right at the kid's ears. And he's right, because they're pointed, just like the Earl Kings and Octavians and the Fisher Kings. "Don't swear in front of the kiddo," Patton objects. In response to this, the dark-haired boy snaps out a short, angry burst of words directed at nobody in particular, and then buries his head in Thomas's chest once more. Looking faintly startled, Thomas sits up properly, so the boy's more in his lap than lying right on top of him, and gently hugs him. Hey, you're fine. You're okay. Are you lost? What's going on?" The boy mumbles something in that strange, weird language, but this time it's quieter, and into Thomas's ear, and it's hard to make out any of it. "Do you know English?" Roman asks, coming down to kneel next to Thomas. The fairy boy recoils away from him, hugging Thomas tighter and saying something that sounds sharp and biting, that's definitely not English or any language Patton recognizes, which is just English, come to think of it. Now everyone's in a loose, round arrangement that could be broadly described as a circle, around Thomas and his new small friend. Not too close, because he seems pretty skittish, all in various stages of sitting, crouching, and kneeling. "You know, I think that may be Italian," Logan says with some interest. "Italian?" Thomas asks. He's preoccupied with rubbing little reassuring circles into the boy's back. Logan crouches down in front of the fairy boy. "Il principe è stupido," he pronounces solemnly, indicating Roman. The boy stares at him for a long, long second before breaking out into a radiant smile and babbling something in agreement with a little flap of his arms. Definitely Italian, Logan surmises, sounding more than a little smug, and then his face falls. I do not know any Italian past that, unfortunately. You learned how to insult me in Italian and nothing else? Roman says, incredulous. It was a while ago, says Logan. It was a less civilized time for all of us. And please, let's not get distracted. How do you suppose a fairy child living in a medieval world came to know Italian? The boy says something long and complicated sounding that ends with B. Virgil shakes his head. Yeah, I caught none of that. Where are your parents? Patton asks. El parentos? He gestures at himself, does his brightest dad grin and accompanying dad pose. The boy just looks super confused. He repeats the sentence again, and then, at their blank expressions, scowls. Thomas, he says, clearly, pointing at Thomas, and then at himself. B. A slight pause, and then he adds, Ciao. Your name's B? Patton tries. Like the insect? The kid, B apparently, shrugs, uncomprehending. He uncoils from Thomas ever so slightly and frowns at him, patting his face, looking into his eyes, trying to find something. When he doesn't find whatever it is, he asks a question, soft and worried. Sorry, bud, I don't understand, Thomas tells him gently. B scowls and grabs Thomas's hand with both of his own, gripping onto it tightly. He mutters something soft and annoyed, and then just kind of tips over, falling into Thomas's lap again with a distinct aura of sulkiness. Thomas tentatively ruffles his hair with his free hand, and he makes a soft, snuffling noise. Oh my goodness, Patton coos, hands to his heart. This is just the sweetest thing. The two of you are so cute, and I am absolutely going to start crying. Janice, do you have Thomas's phone? We have got to get a picture. As much as I would love to have a charming memento of this delightful experience hung and framed on the mantelpiece, all our electronics actually stopped working sometime during the river ride over, Janice says, arms crossed lightly. Patton deflates a bit. Oh. Well, that's a shame. Do you think this might be that other king or whatever? Virgil asks, biting his lip. Pat's fantasy double guy did say he'd be on the other side of the river, and, well, we haven't bumped into anyone else yet. Roman blinks. Well, maybe. I thought he'd be taller. No, I think I recognize him, Thomas says, and glances down to where their hands are linked. Remember how I said the person who helped me escape from the castle was shorter than me? Oh, says Patton. Huh. They all stare down at B for a few long seconds. Thanks, kid, Virgil mutters eventually, and reaches out to gently pat B's back. This time he doesn't flinch away. Don't know what we would have done if you hadn't got him back to us. Another minute or so passes before Janice says, Well, as sweet as all this is, we still really do need to get to my counterpart and get this all over with. Do you suppose he knows where this two-faced king is, or shall we just continue to wander around with blindfolds on? Ah, my apologies, Logan. Metaphorical blindfolds. But at the sound of two-faced king, B almost instantly perks up. He says something that Patton thinks means something along the lines of, Heck yes I do, follow me right this way, and scrambles up off Thomas's lap, tugging him to stand up. Oh, says Logan. Well, that's convenient, but I'm certainly not complaining. B leads them through the forest. He doesn't let go of Thomas's hand the whole time, gently pulling him along in a very direct sort of way, and he seems to be more comfortable with the rest of them now. Within the space of less than 2 minutes, Remus and Janice are teaching him how to say fuck, much to Patton's dismay. He's taking to it with incredible enthusiasm for someone who probably has no idea whatsoever what it means. See, this is why I don't babysit anymore, Thomas says with a faint groan, after B pipes out a particularly loud and piercing fuck that echoes through the trees, disturbing several birds. You guys have to explain this to his parents, if we ever run into them. I shall delegate that particular task to Remus, Janice proclaims with a great deal of dignity. Fine by me, Remus says. He's probably another one of those mirror people, right? Roman says, looking over at Logan. Logan adjusts his glasses. I have a theory. Oh, thank God. Thomas lets out a little sigh of relief. Go ahead. B could just possibly be a diminutive form of Beatrice, he says slowly, and then winces, as if physically pained by the ambiguity. Or at least derived from it, and he seems to exclusively speak Italian, the language in which Dante's Divine Comedy was originally written and published. And from Dante we get... Oh, right, that kind of makes sense, agrees Thomas. Virgil and Beatrice were the secondary characters in that, weren't they? Virgil mutters something angry and opinionated about unrequited heterosexual love and creepy Italian poets under his breath, before he seems to understand the proper implications of what they just said. He performs an admirably comical double take. What? You mean, that's me? It's just a theory, Logan reiterates, and I will admit to it being a bit of a stretch. But really, who else could it be at this point? Again, Patton can see it now that he's looking. The shade of B's tattoos and the shade of Virgil's preferred eyeshadow match up perfectly, and the way he's still clinging to Thomas's hand insistently and glaring out at the forest around them with protective ferocity. B looks up and catches Virgil staring at him. He frowns, then sticks out his tongue at him. Almost reflexively, Virgil does the same. Ooh, same brain cell, Roman says, delighted. The resemblance is rather uncanny, Logan concludes, with a hint of a smile in his tone, if not on his face. The trees around them change as they progress. The tall, willowy pale trunks that have been everywhere up till now have thinned out and have been replaced with bristly, lush green ones that resemble pine trees far more closely. Even in the bird sound less alien, more familiar. If Patton forgets the river to their left and the medieval town some distance down it, he could easily imagine they're back in Florida, trekking through that forest once more. B breaks off from alternating between swearing in English enthusiastically and teaching Remus and a reluctantly intrigued Logan what sound like filthy Italian curses to tug furiously on Thomas's hand and point proudly ahead. There's a little house nestled there, in among the pines. It's a quaint, cramped little thing, more like an afterthought than a proper home. There are thick curtains drawn across the windows and no lights on. Everyone stops walking. I guess this is where the two-faced king lives? Guesses Thomas, scratching his head. B burbles what seems to be an affirmative. Well, I suppose we ring the doorbell, Patton says. Or knock, more likely, Logan corrects. No need, comes the voice of two people, speaking at once in perfect unison from behind them. I'm right here. Virgil lets out an angry, strangled noise and spins to face the people. Oh wait, hang on, it's only one person? Jerking his hands up in an aborted little motion like he's ready to throw down now and here. What? Seriously, what is with all of you people and popping up suddenly to scare the shit out of us? Speak for yourself, I wasn't scared, Roman scoffs. The two-faced king is, well, he's definitely Janice's mirror, Patton can say that for sure. And it's not just because he's a bit strange to look at. Not that it's a bad thing. Janice is a bit strange and maybe a bit scary to look at first, but once you get over the initial shock of, oh gosh, snake face, you realize that his scales are really pretty, and he has a nice smile when he's not being all acidic and standoffish. And it's kind of like that for this guy, too. At first, he looks like a pretty normal person. Fairy. Dark skin, pointed ears, on the short side, calm, stern gaze. He's even got a little crown perched on his neatly parted hair, although it is on the rusty side. But the thing is, if Patton shifts his head even the slightest bit, the two-faced king's face shifts and blends, and all of a sudden he's looking at a completely different person. His hair is lighter and messy, and his gaze is confused, not stern, and he's got a decent helping of freckles all over his cheeks and nose. And if Patton tilts his head again, it's back to the other face. It's like one of those holographic bookmarks that changes when you move it around. This is probably why he's called the two-faced king, come to think of it. He's carrying a covered basket in the crook of one arm, and he has his other hand placed on a hip in a distinctly indifferent sort of gesture. Oh, it's you, he says. His voice sounds doubled, layered over itself twofold. You're not supposed to be here. And then he catches sight of B, and one of his faces looks relieved while the other looks furious. So that's where you went, he says, and then starts speaking in slightly stilted-sounding Italian. B brightens and responds in kind. He doesn't let go of Thomas's hand, but they go back and forth like this for a bit. Thomas's name is mentioned several times, and also something about messes and knots, although that could mean anything. Are you two going to keep blabbering on at each other in fantasy Italian? Janice snaps eventually, annoyed, apparently not at all impressed with his mirror self. My apologies, says the Two-Faced King, who doesn't actually seem all that apologetic about it. His face flickers through amused and that same strange fury. What brings you here? Patton waves. Hi. We were told you could do something about our friend's heart situation? The Two-Faced King takes a long, long moment to stare at Thomas. Both of his faces do. There's something unnervingly intense about it. Yes, he says eventually. One heart swapped out for another, willingly given. A simple little charm. I remember it. So you did do this to me, Thomas breathes. That's really strange. I can almost remember it. The Two-Faced King actually laughs. He hikes up his basket higher on his arm. Oh no, dear Thomas, I'm rather afraid you did this to yourself. Thomas pales a bit and takes a step back. Bee glances up at him, eyes big and dark. Okay, we're going to need a bit of clarification, Remus says after a second. Unless you want me to start enacting some extreme X-rated violence onto your person. I've never done that sort of thing in real life before, but this seems like a good place to start. What are you even talking about? Who are you supposed to be? Oh, I am completely irrelevant, replies the Two-Faced King, and certainly not the one you want to be talking to. You're maybe the third or fourth person today to tell us that, Virgil retorts, visibly on the edge of losing it completely, possibly with a side serving of that X-rated violence Remus had been talking about. Seriously, do you mirror people just get a kick out of sending us running around the forest like some weird fantasy-flavored pass the parcel? Also, if you're not the person we want to talk to, who is? Roman demands. That would be me, says someone with a very distinctive Scottish accent. Bee exclaims in excitement, but Patton isn't paying attention because at the sound of this person's voice he feels his heart speed up. He doesn't know why, but he feels... No, he doesn't know what he feels. Dizzy, maybe? There's some weird sort of anticipation and something he can't describe. A feeling of bewildering rightness is the best way he can think of putting it. Like finding a missing puzzle piece a week after you've given up on tracking it down. The door to the Two-Faced King's house is now open, and framed by that doorway is a figure in a long, dark cloak. Except that cloak is pushed back now, and now everyone can see his face. Slightly crooked grin, messy ginger hair, bright hazel eyes, and what he's wearing, what appears to be light leather armor over a plain tunic. River guy? Roman exclaims. And hey, yeah, it is the guy from the start of this. The one that had just known Patton's name out of nowhere for no reason, which had been super weird, and then apparently they all just got caught up with everything and forgot about that. Thomas, next to Patton, goes rigid with startled realization, and then he says, It's you! The stranger from the river grins. Good to see you again, Thomas, he greets, as well as the rest of you. Please do come in. We have a lot to talk about and not much time to spare, so we might as well do it in comfort. Ah, yes, feel free to steal my home and appropriate it as you see fit, says the Two-Faced King. He's frowning, but if Patton tilts his head just right, he can see the smile on the other face. Well, you did offer, shoots the stranger back, playful but with an undercurrent of distinct tension. He looks to the sides and Thomas, all of whom haven't moved to join him in the slightest. Well, what on earth are you waiting for? Well, a name might be a start, Logan suggests. Yeah, Virgil agrees. Who the hell are you supposed to be? The stranger looks gently puzzled. I rather thought Thomas would have told you by now, he says, and then, scrutinizing Thomas's pale, shocked face, or perhaps not. Well, no matter. It only means he won't have to hear it twice. My name is Thomas Linus Alexander. His eyes glint in the dim, early morning light, and there's an incredible familiarity, because they're eyes that Patton knows exactly as well as he knows his own. But all of my friends tend to call me Tamlin. Now, won't you please come inside? We really are running out of time.